We live in an era of fragile environments. The natural world is a complex, interdependent system of natural resources, vegetation, and wildlife, mutually reliant upon each other for sustenance and survival. The civilized world is also a fragile environment, an interconnected network of mechanical and electronic technologies that rely upon a steady stream of electricity to keep them functioning. Electrical energy is woven into the fabric of everyday life, essential to many of the processes that we take for granted, an integral part of almost everything we use. Electricity creates opportunities for entertainment and makes possible the flow of vast quantities of information. Although electricity enriches almost every aspect of our lives, the production and distribution of electrical energy have often come at the expense of the natural environment. Large hydroelectric dams wiped out many salmon runs and changed the nature of the watershed. Coal-fired plants pollute the air and contribute to acid rain. And nuclear plants run the risk of contaminating the land, air, and water. Although we will certainly need more electricity in the future, the challenge will be to generate electrical energy without damaging the natural environment. Part of the answer may lie in an old technology that is being used in a new way. Boiling water, drawn downward by gravity, creates a force that has been harnessed throughout the ages to do various kinds of work. In America, water power was first used in mills and mines to operate heavy equipment. And after the invention of the turbine, water began to be used to generate electricity. On rivers that had a lot of flow but not very much drop, low-head dams were constructed to house large hydroelectric turbines. And on streams that had a lot of fall, high-head projects were built, where small quantities of water were diverted down through long pipelines to powerhouses below. In the Pacific Northwest, an area rich with hydroelectric potential, huge dams were constructed on the Columbia River, and centralized transmission systems were set up to distribute electrical energy to public and private utilities throughout the region. After most of the sites for large-scale hydro had been developed, utilities kept up with the demand for electricity by building thermal plants that used coal, oil, or nuclear fuels. But the energy crisis of the 1970s shocked most Americans into an awareness of our dependency on cheap foreign oil. And the accident at 3 Mile Island raised new concerns about nuclear power for utilities that were already facing construction cost overruns and escalating prices for non-renewable fuels. In an effort to develop dependable energy supplies, Congress passed the National Energy Act, which guaranteed a market for independent producers of electricity, and the Northwest Regional Power Act, which outlined long-term goals for the region that included a mandate for energy conservation and an emphasis on the development of renewable resources like solar, wind, and hydro.
Congress felt that there had been an overemphasis in the Northwest on thermal development to meet our electric energy needs, and that we had not paid as much attention, we'd not gotten the full measure of benefit that we could have out of conservation and renewables, principally small hydropower.
The idea behind the national legislation was to promote the production of electricity from renewable resources and to postpone the building of new thermal plants. Utilities were now required to pay for power from renewables at the avoided cost of building a nuclear or coal-fired facility. Because of the economic incentives offered under the federal law called PURPA, many hydro developers rushed to claim sites on creeks and streams all over the country. In Oregon alone, the number of applications for permits jumped from 5 in 1979 to 119 in 1981. Although hundreds of sites have been filed on for study, the fact is that most proposed hydro projects never get built.
There are a number of applications that we will have received that we don't see further activity on. There are a number of projects that while the developer might be keenly interested in moving forward, either the economics of the project are not there, or it is simply not possible to overcome the environmental limitations that may exist.
The State Water Resources Department evaluates each hydro application and, after reviewing reports from other agencies, determines whether the planned development meets strict environmental standards. More than 90% of the sites that do get licensed for possible development in Oregon are microhydro, usually 75 kilowatts or less. In the mountains east of Portland, Roger McInnes and Cliff Graff received a permit to build a small facility on a creek that runs across their land. Although this project only produces enough power to serve 3 average households, it demonstrates the basic operation of small hydro and illustrates some of the environmental concerns that must be addressed. McInnes and Graff divert less than half the water from Trapper Creek through an intake valve that is screened to protect migrating fish. From here, the water travels through 1,300 feet of plastic pipeline, or penstock, dropping more than 35 feet of elevation over that distance. The falling water spins a Pelton wheel turbine and turns an old motor into an electrical generator before flowing back into the creek. Because the 2 men did all the work themselves, they were able to build the project for about $6,000 and now make around $100 a month by selling the power they produce directly to the private utility that serves their area. But to McInnes and Graff, the money they receive is not as important as showing that electrical energy can be generated from renewable resources without having a significant impact on the environment.
These little streams are all carrying off that 10 foot of rain that we have every year. And that rain has got to go from up here in the mountains at 1,000 or 2 or 3 of elevation, and it's got to get down to sea level. And it makes a lot of sense to harvest that energy in little bite-sized pieces all over the region instead of damming up a major river after all these little tributaries are run together.
Most of the new hydroelectric developments are in this microhydro category, projects that have little impact but also produce little power. But if renewable resources are to begin to displace coal or nuclear plants as the PURPA Act intended, then facilities that generate much larger amounts of electricity must be developed and brought online. One way to make hydroelectric power without building a new dam is to retrofit an old one. In an existing earth-filled dam that was used to regulate the flow of the Deschutes River, the Confederated Tribes of Warm Springs placed a turbine that now makes enough electricity to serve 3,000 homes.
We came in and installed a hydro unit, which in turn uses the water through the unit instead of the spill gates. So we're utilizing the water that was being wasted.
This retrofit project now generates 19.5 megawatts of electricity and brings in more than $4 million a year to the Indian community. Remodeling the old dam cost $30 million and was financed through a variety of sources, including SELP, the Small-Scale Energy Loan Program created by the Oregon State Legislature.
Everybody was studying projects, but nobody was doing much about them. The legislature thought here was the opportunity to provide financing to see projects actually built to help Oregon with its energy needs.
The state of Oregon does not spend tax dollars on small-scale energy projects, but instead sells bonds that provide capital, which is loaned to independent power producers who want to develop new sources of clean electrical energy. But retrofitting old dams and building microhydro facilities account for only part of the potential for new hydroelectric power in the state. Many developers are now looking at high-head sites that are similar to some of the earliest hydro projects, where small quantities of water dropping over long distances yield significant amounts of electricity. With hundreds of steep mountain streams, a large annual rainfall, and plenty of snowmelt, Oregon is well suited to high-head hydro development.
Now, I've looked at about 100 sites in Oregon, low-head sites and high-head sites. And the ones that seem the best to develop are the high-head sites. You take a small quantity of water, you drop it a long distance, and you end up with a significant amount of power. Now, if you do it right, you won't mess up the stream or the surrounding area.
The search for a prime hydro site begins by examining topographical maps, looking for creeks and streams that have long drops in elevation over short distances. A promising site is identified in the mountains east of Sweet Home on Falls Creek, a small stream that runs into the South Santiam River. Upon closer inspection, the location seems to have all the elements necessary for a high-head water diversion project. Steep terrain, abundant precipitation, and stream conditions that are unsuitable for migrating fish all contribute to the potential for producing power here. To gain more information about the feasibility of the project, a temporary dam called a weir is built across the stream and is used to accurately measure the amount of water flowing in the creek. Data gathered from recordings made over a period of a year helps to calculate the amount of power that could be generated in the site and the size of the project that should be built in order to maximize energy production. After determining that there is enough water and enough fall to produce several megawatts of power, Gary Marcus teams up with engineers who will design the entire facility, diversion, pipeline, and powerhouse, for efficient production of electricity with minimal impact on the mountain and stream. After deciding that the project is environmentally and economically feasible, the developer works in several different areas simultaneously, negotiating a power sales contract with a local utility, preparing environmental impact statements for agency approval, and applying for a small-scale energy loan to help finance the $5 million project. The Federal Energy Regulatory Commission and the Oregon Water Resources Department are responsible for granting the licenses, but there are a dozen state and federal agencies that may review the proposed hydro development. These agencies assess the impact of the project on fish populations, stream flow, water quality, timber resources, and recreational values before any construction can be authorized. Since the Falls Creek project would be built on national forest land, the U.S. Forest Service must decide whether the proposal is consistent with timber management objectives and environmental concerns.
I think that, as in the case of the Falls Creek project, we have to look site-specifically and be sure that what we're doing will be compatible with the needs of the environment, of the forest management, and of the wildlife, and all of the other issues that we have to deal with.
One of the primary concerns has to do with fish and whether the proposed development has an adverse impact on the resident or migratory populations within the stream. Since the design of the Falls Creek Hydro Project calls for a water diversion that reduces stream flow, the Fish and Wildlife Department takes a close look at what species are present in the creek and how this development might affect their habitat.
Small-scale hydro does not necessarily have to be detrimental to a fish population or the habitat if adequate safeguards are built into the project, if adequate flows are left for fish, and proper screening is designed into the project.
Although the agencies do a good job of evaluating the possible effects of each proposed hydro development, there are growing concerns that more than one project on the stream might have a cumulative impact that may be damaging to the fish populations within the watershed. In order to evaluate the potential impacts of a water diversion on Falls Creek, fish biologist Roger Ovink did a careful study, identifying species, counting populations of salmon and trout, and analyzing the quality of water in the stream. Ovink discovered that several high waterfalls prevented salmon from migrating up Falls Creek to spawn, and that diverting part of the stream flow would not alter the plunge pools inhabited by resident trout.
Through the assessments that we've done and the applications we've filed and the checks and rechecks that have been conducted by the various state and federal agencies involved with this project, it has a very minimal impact, perhaps no impact, on the trout populations using Falls Creek. And it has absolutely no impact on the salmon and steelhead populations using the Santiam River.
It took almost 2 years and 4,000 pages of documentation for Marcus to prepare environmental impact statements for all the agencies, sign a 35-year contract to sell his electricity to Pacific Power and Light, and finally receive the necessary licenses and loans so that construction on the Falls Creek Hydro Project could begin. The approved design, which is both innovative and ambitious, calls for part of the water from Falls Creek, which usually flows down the south side of the mountain, to be diverted and piped through an 8,000-foot penstock that would run down the steep slopes on the north side of the mountain. After falling 2,400 feet in elevation, the water would pass through a Pelton wheel turbine and generate over 4 megawatts of electricity before flowing back into the Santiam River. Near the top of the mountain, construction begins after the snowmelt in late spring. Just downstream from the weir, the diversion site is prepared by temporarily rerouting the flow of water and carefully removing material from the creek bed. The diversion structure does not dam up the stream. Instead, it will allow a constant flow of water down Falls Creek, while diverting 26 cubic feet per second to be used for generating electricity.
The challenge in this site was to get the water from this point here down to the powerhouse, which is 8,000 feet away. And the way we did that was to cut a very narrow corridor through the trees. And we just cut that corridor, dug a trench, put the pipe in, and then covered it up again.
Probably the most difficult problem in the construction of the penstock was how we were going to get the pipe up on the hill in the first place so that the welders could weld it up. That was overcome fairly early in the construction when they chose an overhead cable system, a skyline system.
At the base of the mountain, the powerhouse is anchored with a reinforced foundation in order to withstand the tremendous pressure from the water coming down the penstock. Although the equipment inside was custom built for this specific site, the power generating facility works on the same principles as early water wheels. The water enters the turbine through special nozzles and strikes a hand-polished Pelton wheel. The wheel is attached to a precisely balanced shaft which will spin at 1,200 revolutions per minute and turn the rotor inside the generator. The whole facility is controlled by a series of computers which will monitor everything from water entering the pipeline to electricity flowing out of the powerhouse.
The project itself has been condensed into actual working time of about 8 months, and it's just been a tremendous job. And now to see it almost, complete is it's getting real exciting to turn the switch.
From finding the site to completing the construction took only 2.5 years. And now the Falls Creek Project, one of the largest private hydro developments in Oregon, generates 4.5 megawatts of hydroelectric power without damaging the natural environment. This plant is expected to last for 100 years and will continue to provide enough electricity to serve 900 homes. Electricity harnessed from Oregon's most renewable resource, water.
The concept of using a renewable resource and using it in a responsible way appealed to me. And at the time I started this, the economics were right. There was a power shortage, and I was able to build this project and have the cost of the power cover the expenses of building it.
The power sales contract for the Falls Creek project was negotiated when an energy shortage was forecast for the Northwest and utilities were paying a high price for electricity from renewable resources. But now the region is faced with an energy surplus, and many independent hydro producers are unable to develop potential sites because utilities have lowered the price they are willing to pay for new supplies of electricity.
Right now we have a surplus in the region, and so their need for new energy is being pushed off further and further into the future. The farther away it is, the less they need to pay for energy today. So right now we find that the price they'll pay for energy is dropped considerably from what it was a couple of years ago. It will rise again when that need for new energy moves closer to us.
As the need for energy approaches, prices will go up, and renewable resource projects will again become economically feasible to build. If enough of these small-scale facilities can be brought online, then construction of a new coal or nuclear plant could be pushed further ahead into the future. But as the Northwest has seen in recent years, energy forecasts can change dramatically, leaving utilities and other power producers uncertain about how much electricity will be needed and what kind of electrical generating facilities should be developed to fill that need.
The coal-fired plants and the nuclear plants now cost more per kilowatt hour, given all the costs associated with developing them, than do the many diversified possibilities of developing or generating energy that we have. Small hydro, for example.
As a generating resource, hydro is perhaps the best resource for meeting our needs in a period of uncertainty. It has a short lead time for construction. It comes in small increments, and for the most part, its capital costs are lower than some of the generating alternatives such as nuclear plants that we've relied on in the past.
My personal feeling is that hydroelectric power is a much preferable way than coal generation or nuclear powered. But I don't think that we ought to go hog wild and start putting in dams on all of our fish streams and just going crazy with hydroelectric just because it happens to be cheap and clean.
The Pacific Northwest has long enjoyed the benefits of abundant supplies of inexpensive hydroelectric power. But the era of building large low-head dams is over, and because of huge economic and environmental costs, thermal plants will be more difficult to bring online when power is needed in the future. Although energy conservation will help in the short run, as new electrical generation becomes necessary, the most promising option may be to return to an early technology that has proven itself over the years to be reliable, cost-effective, and environmentally clean.
The case can be made persuasively that we need to keep alive the development potential in small hydro, simply because over time we know that a greater and greater share of our energy must come from small hydro projects.
If the project indeed can be concluded to be environmentally acceptable, and that to me is a key, then I do think that that represents a reasonable way to produce some part of the ultimate power need that we're going to have here in the Northwest.
Small-scale hydro can play an important role in the Northwest energy future. We've got sites like this that can be brought online in 3 to 5 years. They can be brought online in small increments so they can meet the gradual increase in demand. And we're lucky that there's so many potential sites that, if responsibly developed, can provide clean energy for our future.